Hello dear listener, dear viewer, my name is Mompoloki Lerumo Mogobe, the host of this podcast, Mogobe's Nuggets of Wisdom podcast. Today I'm coming to you with something very fresh, something new. You know, my background is law and I'm also an entrepreneur focused on property. So there's an interchange between property and law, especially over having to do with the process of transfer of property. So a lot of people are mystified by this process, and I've taken the time to just compile 10 nuggets of wisdom on the conveyancing process. Specifically, I've prepared for you 10 nuggets of wisdom on transferring property. In other words, the conveyancing process itself. I think it's important to connect this with the earlier episode which I gave to you on due diligence in a property deal. And there is an extent to which some of the processes and procedures I'm going to share with you overlap, but I think these specifically will be helpful when it comes to transferring property. Number one, meet with a good conveyancing lawyer. What do I mean by this? Find somebody who has got a reputation in the community. Here in Botswana, the banks have a list of lawyers who are in their panels. Find out someone who is in that panel or someone whose name is well known. You can check in their website or some other source to establish that you found a good and reputable conveyancing lawyer to tell them of your intentions to transfer a property, where you might be a seller or where you might be a buyer. You may both go together to see this conveyancing attorney on whom you agree. Number two, exhibit to the conveyancer or the conveyancing attorney all relevant documents. What do I mean by all relevant documents? You need all the documents pertaining to the deal. I'm talking here about the title deed. I'm talking about a copy of the buyer and the seller's ID. If the seller or the buyer are companies, you'll need certificates of incorporation, you'll need share certificates, and then this will enable the conveyancer to prepare the necessary paperwork relating to the proposed transfer. So you have to exhibit all the relevant documentations to the conveyancing attorney. Number three, search a little bit into the history of the property that you want to purchase. What do I mean by that? As part of the due diligence process, do a little bit of an investigation before going further. At the early stages of the process, get the lawyer to do a thorough deed search. Go to the Registrar of Deeds to investigate the background of the property, to establish specifically whether there are any mortgage bonds over that property, whether there are any forms of encumbrances over the property before going any further. This one is very important because it has happened in rare instances where, not as rare as I would like, I mean it has happened quite a few times where people come with property that doesn't even belong to them, properties that are subject to disputes, and so on and so forth. So you need to do a thorough deed search and to investigate any encumbrances, any liens, and that sort of thing over the property before going any further. Number four, in the case of plots that are not registered at the deeds office, in other words, where the property in question falls within the category of tribal properties or it's under the scheme of the land board, what you want to do, especially where the property is not yet registered, because as you know, it's possible to convert a property from the land board scheme to the common law scheme through the process of registration of title. But sometimes you want to buy this property, but you don't want to necessarily go through the Registrar of Deeds. In other words, you have in your agreement an arrangement where you have sight of the certificate of title, or sometimes you might even have a lease itself, a land board lease over that property. So you review that property, get that document, and then you go to the land board itself, ask to see a high-ranking officer, even the secretary of the land board himself, and ask for a letter of confirmation or a letter of authenticity with regard to that certificate, with regard to that that particular document, be it a certificate, or in some cases it could just be an ordinary lease between the owner and the land board. What you want is to make sure that the documents are authentic, because it has happened a few times that people manufacture these documents and create documents that look exactly identical to the original. Unless you go to the land board to verify and to ascertain, you may not be aware of what is exactly going on. Number 5, get the full details and the particulars of the property. What do I mean by that? I'm referring to getting the details of the identity of the party involved. That may seem like a routine thing to say, it may seem like a mundane thing to say, but in my experience, you need to go deeper. You may find that the owner or the person whose names appears on the document is married, and they're transferring the property without the knowledge of the other spouse. So you go deeper and find out whether that person is married, whether they're married in or out of community of property, and get the full identity of the individuals involved, and make sure that they participate in the process so that you do not waste your time, and certainly you do not part with your money needlessly. Number 6, sometimes it's helpful, and I do this in the context of our transactions as Mogobe Incorporated. We go to the bank and we seek the assistance of the bank. Sometimes we even seek such assistance when we're not necessarily going to use the bank. The bank has credit committees, the bank has personnel who are qualified, who are able to help you cross-check and verify certain things before the transfer. This happens automatically when you are seeking a bank loan anyway. The bank has to go through various credit committees and various levels within the bank where the deal is checked. There are boxes to tick, there are T's to cross, and there are I's to dot to make sure that the transaction is complete. So you may want to go through the bank first to ask them whether it's going to be a yay or a nay with regard to that particular transaction. It's very, very helpful indeed. Number 7, obtain a BURS certificate and compliance certificates. Speaking specifically about the BURS certificate, I think the government has now streamlined the processes where everything has to go through the BURS, Botswana Unified Revenue Service, to make sure that taxes on the property are paid, to make sure that any taxes that may be due as a result of the transaction are paid. So you may need to, you definitely need to get a BURS certificate for the transaction to go ahead and to be registered. Similarly, with the compliance certificate, a certificate of compliance is a certificate which is normally issued by a land board to confirm that you have done sufficient enough by way of a development on that property to justify a transfer. In other words, there's a requirement in most land board certificates that you, before you can transfer to a third party or to another party, you have to have developed a property, the property to a certain extent. Sometimes it's enough to have something as small as a 2-roomed house on the property, something as small as a guard house on the property, or some structure to show that you have developed prior to transfer. It's a mandatory requirement, and you need to obtain a certificate of compliance, especially in the context of a title that emanates from the land board, where you have a registered certificate or you have a registered lease, I mean to say. So that is very, very important indeed. Number 8, rates clearance. For plots to, there's a requirement, especially in the case of individuals, actually individuals and companies have to obtain a rates clearance certificate. In our firm, we make sure that it's a provision in the deed of sale that makes it clear that the seller is responsible for payment of rates up to the date of transfer. So normally it's a matter of asking the seller to cough up so that you can clear the rates so that transfer can be facilitated. Continuing with the 10 nuggets of wisdom on the conveyancing and the transferring process, I think let me go to number 9. But before I do that, let me clarify that the order in which I mention these things can vary. In other words, you don't necessarily have to rigidly stick to the sequence which I've set out herein. Having clarified that, number 9 is preparation of the deed of sale. It's very important that your attorney or the conveyancing lawyer prepares a comprehensive deed of sale If there are any special clauses, there are any special requirements, those have to be incorporated. But we at Lerumo Mogobe Legal Practitioners have standard comprehensive agreements of sale that seek to protect the interests of both parties, that detail all the requirements, the money amount, how it's going to be paid, and whether or not a bond is going to be registered, etc. All that has to be incorporated into that comprehensive deed of sale. Number 10, lodgement at the Registrar of Deeds. It is the responsibility of the conveyancing attorney and his or her staff to ensure that everything, once all the documents are signed, all the preliminary requirements are met, that everything is submitted at the Registrar of Deeds. What I ought to emphasize here is that your job is to politely harass them. In other words, hold them to their turnaround time. If you've been told that the turnaround time is 7 days, or in our case it's roughly 10 days at our law firm, make sure that you make it your responsibility to follow up and to inquire. In Setswana we say, which loosely translated means that the harvest is only as good as its owner, which means you are harvesting something, you want results, and your job is to make sure that you push that result. So this is the part that I don't want you to hold back and relax and say, no, it's in the hands of my lawyer, let them take their time. You have to politely harass, for lack of a better term, them and inquire maybe every other day to make sure that the process is pushed. Those are the top 10 nuggets of wisdom on the transferring process. But as usual, let me give you number 11, which is a bonus. Whatever happens, do not take corners. Do not be anxious to finalize the transfer to the point that you ignore the procedures and the processes. Whether or not there's a comprehensive deed of sale in place, make sure that you do not cut corners. This is not like the sale of Magwinya. Magwinya is fat cakes. These are not fat cakes. There's no excessive urgency involved. This involves substantial sums of money. This involves your vital interest, which is property, and therefore make sure that you do not take any shortcuts and you follow this process line by line, detail by detail, step by step. Thank you very much, dear viewer. Those are the top 10 nuggets plus a bonus on the transferring process. Please make sure that you transfer to, what is the right word? Make sure that you subscribe to our channel, and then make sure that you like what you're hearing. Thank you very much. Until next time, this is Mompoloki Lerumo Mogobe signing.